The morning was calm, almost too calm. A thin mist hung over the quiet street where nothing ever happened. Birds sang softly, and children laughed on their way to school. Everything looked peaceful, until the flashing lights came. Police cars blocked the road, reporters shouted questions, and curious neighbors gathered outside one house, David Miller's house. People whispered his name like it didn't belong in this nightmare. David, the friendly man who fixed everyone's lawnmower, who smiled at kids, who always waved first. No one could understand what they were seeing. Officers carried out boxes, sealed bags, and folders filled with evidence. Then someone said the words that froze everyone in place. They found something in the basement. Inside that basement, detectives uncovered a hidden wall. Behind it, a secret room no one knew existed. Old photos, personal belongings, and something much worse. The air was heavy, and the silence screamed louder than words. But how did it all start? 15 years earlier, when David first moved into Brookville, he was just another face in the crowd. He rented a small house, worked at a local hardware store, and quickly made friends. He was polite, quiet, and dependable, the kind of neighbor people trusted without question. He fixed cars on weekends, helped older residents carry groceries, and even built a playground bench for the local park. Parents said he was such a good man. Kids said he gave the best candy on Halloween. But behind his calm smile, something darker lived, something patient, something waiting. At night, when the town slept, David changed. He would drive his old pickup down empty highways, searching for someone alone. A traveler, a hitchhiker, someone who wouldn't be missed right away. He was careful, always careful. He didn't leave evidence, didn't rush, didn't talk to anyone about his late-night drives. When people disappeared, no one connected it to him. The victims were from different places, passing through, gone without a trace. The police wrote reports, posted missing person flyers, and moved on. David watched the news every morning, sipping his coffee. Sometimes he smiled. In Brookville, David was still the helpful neighbor everyone loved. He joined local events, donated old tools, and even volunteered for safety patrol during town fairs. Ironically, he was part of a group meant to keep the town safe. No one saw the signs, not the quiet look in his eyes, not the nights when his truck vanished for hours, not the strange smell once coming from his garage that he blamed on old paint. David was good at pretending. He wore normal clothes, told harmless jokes, and lived an ordinary life. People trusted him because they wanted to. But the darkness inside him was growing stronger. Each time he took a life, it gave him power. And each time, he promised himself it would be the last. But it never was. He liked the control, the secret. He liked that nobody suspected him. He had learned how to hide in plain sight, and he was perfect at it. At the end of that first year in Brookville, another person went missing. No one linked it to David Miller. Why would they? He was just the kind man who helped fix a neighbor's fence that same week. When police asked if he'd seen anything strange, he said with a gentle smile, "I wish I could help. It's a shame what's happening these days." And they believed him. Everyone did. Because monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like your neighbor, the one who smiles, waves, and asks how your day's been. Years passed and Brookville stayed the same. Peaceful, friendly, safe. The kind of town where people left their doors unlocked and trusted every face they saw. David Miller still lived in his small white house at the corner of Maple Street. His lawn was always trimmed, his smile always ready. People greeted him every morning without a single thought of fear. But beneath that calm life, a dark pattern was slowly forming. Every few months someone went missing. Never from Brookville itself, always from nearby towns or travelers passing through. A woman on a night jog, a man whose car broke down, a teenager who never made it home from a party. Police investigated each case, but nothing matched. Different times, different places, no clear motive, no single suspect. David knew that. He planned for it. He never struck close to home. He never left a mark. Neighbors sometimes whispered about strange things. A soft thud heard late at night, the faint sound of digging behind David's house. Once, a boy swore he saw David carrying something large into his shed after midnight. But when adults asked about it later, the boy shrugged. Maybe he'd imagined it. David made sure of that. He smiled, waved, and made jokes whenever someone looked uneasy. He had a way of making people doubt their own thoughts. Soon the whispers faded. Life went back to normal. What no one knew was that David kept a secret collection hidden deep in his basement. A small wooden box, locked with a heavy chain. Inside he kept tokens, little pieces from each person he took. A ring, a photo, a name tag. Things that reminded him he was smarter than everyone else. To him, each piece told a story. A story only he understood, and every time he looked at that box, he felt proud. Proud that no one could see the monster he really was. He studied crime shows, read police reports, and laughed when detected. "I've on TV made mistakes. They'll never catch me," he would whisper. "I'm not like them." Then came a night when he almost got caught. David was driving home from another small town. The moon was low, the road empty. He stopped at a red light, the only one for miles. A police car pulled up beside him. For a second, their eyes met. David smiled and gave a friendly nod. The officer smiled back. The light turned green and both drove away. That was how close he lived to danger. One smile, one calm face, and suspicion vanished. In Brookville, people began to notice how often David showed up when someone went missing nearby. He joined search groups, helped hang posters, and comforted worried families. To most, that made him look like a hero. No one saw that he was standing among the very people he'd hurt. At one search party, a woman cried and said she hoped the missing would come home soon. David gently touched her shoulder and said, "They always turn up somewhere. Don't lose hope." But inside, he already knew the truth. Over the years, David became almost invisible, not because no one saw him, but because everyone trusted him. He was too ordinary to suspect, too kind to accuse. And as more faces disappeared from nearby towns, the police grew frustrated. There were no fingerprints, no clues, no witnesses. One detective even said on TV, "It's like this person doesn't exist." Watching the news that night, David laughed quietly. "You're right," he whispered. "I don't." He thought he had fooled the world, and for a long time he had. But even the most careful monsters eventually make a mistake. And David's would come soon, in a way no one expected. For almost 10 years, David Miller had lived two lives, one as the kind neighbor everyone trusted, and another as a silent predator no one knew existed. He believed he was untouchable, careful, perfect. But one rainy night, everything changed. The storm came suddenly. Heavy rain poured across the highway as David followed a small blue car. Inside was a young woman driving home alone after work. David had been watching her for days. He knew her route, her routine, her loneliness. Lightning flashed as the car pulled into a gas station. David waited in his truck, pretending to check his phone. He didn't know a new security camera had been installed above the pumps that week, one that caught every license plate, every face. That camera would become the beginning of his end. The woman disappeared that night. Her car was later found near a forest road, doors locked, keys still inside. No one could understand what had happened. Police began checking footage from nearby cameras. And there it was. David's old pickup, clearly visible, following her just before she vanished. It was the first real clue in years. Detective Harris, who had worked on several missing cases, noticed the same truck had been seen near 2 other disappearances. That was enough to start digging deeper. They ran the plate. David Miller, the same friendly man who fixed everyone's fences and baked pies for the town fair. Harris couldn't believe it, but the evidence was right there. The investigation began quietly. For weeks, officers watched David's every move. They took photos, tracked his routines, followed his routes. At first, he seemed normal. He went to work, greeted his neighbors, and even waved at a police patrol car as it passed. But slowly, they noticed things that didn't fit. He took late-night drives to empty roads. He returned home at strange hours. Sometimes he left the lights on in his basement until morning. One night, under the cover of darkness, detectives saw him carry a large black bag out to his shed. He looked around nervously before locking it inside. That was the moment they knew. Something was wrong. 2 days later, the police got a search warrant. When David came home from work, officers were already waiting at his door. He smiled politely, pretending to be surprised. "Is there a problem, officer?" he asked calmly. "There might be," one replied. They searched his house from top to bottom. Every room looked clean. Too clean, like someone had recently scrubbed everything. But in the basement, they found something strange. A shelf that didn't quite touch the wall. When they moved it aside, they saw a small door hidden behind layers of paint and wallpaper. Inside that secret space was a nightmare. Dozens of items, wallets, jewelry, notebooks, photos, neatly placed in rows. And in the corner, a wooden box with a heavy chain. Inside were things no one should ever see. The quiet, kind man from Maple Street was not who he seemed. David didn't resist when they arrested him. He simply looked around at the flashing lights and the shocked faces of his neighbors. He smiled. A cold, empty smile. "I knew it wouldn't last forever," he said softly. As the officers led him away, one detective whispered, "How many, David? How many did you hurt?" David only said, "Enough to be remembered." The secret he had guarded for so long was finally exposed. The mask had fallen, and the perfect neighbor was gone. The town of Brookville fell silent the night David Miller was arrested. News spread fast, faster than anyone could believe. The man they trusted, the man who waved every morning, had been living a double life. Reporters surrounded his small white house, their cameras flashing through the night. Neighbors stood behind yellow tape, crying, shaking their heads, whispering the same question again and again. How could this happen here? For years they had shared meals with him, borrowed his tools, and left their children in his care. Now everything felt poisoned by his secret. Inside the police station, David sat calmly at a small table, hands cuffed, eyes cold. Detectives placed photos and files in front of him, the evidence from his hidden room. Each picture told a story, each name a life he had taken. But David didn't look away. He studied every image like a proud artist staring at his work. "Why, David?" asked Detective Harris, the same officer who had caught him. "Why did you do this?" David's lips curved into a slow smile. "Because I could. Because no one ever looked close enough." There was no anger in his voice, no guilt, only calm. He enjoyed the power, even now, sitting in chains. As the investigation continued, more details came out. His trophies matched missing person reports from different towns and states. The diaries found in his basement described his crimes in chilling detail. The dates, the names, even how he chose his victims. He wrote about it like a hobby. Like a game, he was proud of winning. The police called it one of the most disturbing cases in the region's history. They found evidence linking him to at least 12 murders, though they believed there were more. Families of the missing came to the courthouse, hoping for answers. Some cried, others screamed at him from the back of the room. David never reacted. He just stared straight ahead, quiet and emotionless. During his trial, the courtroom was packed every day. The air felt heavy, like everyone was afraid to breathe. Journalists filled the aisles. Cameras clicked as David walked in wearing a grey suit, smiling faintly as if attending a normal meeting. The prosecutor described every terrible thing he had done. The jury listened in silence. Even the judge's voice trembled at times. When it was his turn to speak, David said only one thing. "I'm not sorry. The world never saw me. And that was their mistake." Gasps filled the room. A mother sobbed loudly. But David showed nothing. After weeks of testimony, the verdict was clear. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without parole. David blinked once, nodded, and smiled again. In the days that followed, Brookville changed forever. People replaced their locks. They stopped trusting strangers. They looked at each other differently, wondering what evil might hide behind another friendly face. David's house was later torn down, but neighbors said they could still feel the chill whenever they passed the empty lot, as if the walls still remembered. Detective Harris visited the site one last time. He stood where the basement used to be and whispered, "You fooled us all, David. But not anymore." The wind blew softly through the grass, cold and quiet. David Miller would spend the rest of his life behind bars, alone, forgotten by the world he once fooled. But his story stayed alive. Not for what he did, but for what he taught everyone. Evil doesn't always hide in shadows. Sometimes it smiles, sometimes it waves, and sometimes it lives right next door.